Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and I want to throw another shout out to PST. This tier list that I'm going to be showing you a screenshot of, this is kind of the end results of PST's live tier list. And yes, there are some relevant units that aren't on here, but man, if you saw the size of the list of units, and also some were missing from the pool. Don't blame her that she didn't make the pool of units. But this does give us a generally good idea of where the JP meta is, and that gives us some ideas of where our meta is going to go and when and how far, etc. So, after watching, like an hour and a half of this tier list video, which was great. If you want a longer, more detailed explanation of this, just watch that video. There's no reason to watch both. You're going to get more details from somebody who knows it even better if you watch that. If you don't have the time, I'm going to be uncharacteristic and try to keep it short. So, first takeaway, what elements are doing best? So currently, Lightning is doing best, and as an Earth player and as a player who knows that there are a lot of Earth accounts in my guild, I'm really happy about that. Secondly, for a lot of the same reasons, I'm happy that Earth is a comfortable second, and with their new tank, could be a definite contender for first. Then, going into third place, we probably have Fire, or fire-ish. And what do I mean by fire-ish? I mean Kefka, Roy Mustang, and Summer Helena. So we got a lightning unit on there to kind of even out the team a little bit, and make it just a little bit more competitive against water. Still, probably not, like, I can't imagine this team wants to run into Celeste, but, you know, obviously they're not intentionally fighting water teams with it. I'm just saying that it has a little bit of a chance against a water team, whereas most fire teams wouldn't. But really the reason that this team works together is glove-based VCs, and we're going to talk a little bit more about job-based VCs and which ones are becoming more relevant. But that is definitely a new emergence since Kefka came out, and it looks like the strongest way to use Kefka. Anyways, moving on. The next strongest element is water. And once again, this is a pretty solid fourth that is also helped out a lot by the fact that the element that is slightly dominant to it at this point is weak to it. So that's pretty cool. It means that water players and earth players are going to have people to swing at in guild battle very likely for well into the near future. Go us. But also, lightning players and fire players are going to be getting a lot of firepower over the next couple of months. In fact, like, fire has been kind of garbage for a while. I think really the only good niche that it has ever had probably was in Light Evasion's heyday, and only if you had Terra. Other than that, fire has always been kind of an awkward element that didn't have a team. It didn't have, like, I mean, it's really hard to say that fire ever had a coherent team. Which isn't to say that there weren't strong fire teams at different points, but again, there's kind of a lack of coherence. It never did a thing very well. And now all of a sudden, especially with if you have Sorrow, and if you're planning to get Yuffie, you have just unlocked Fire Evasion. You don't necessarily need Sorrow, though you almost certainly want his VC because of the Fire Evasion. Roll compression is fucking nuts. It's a luck agility VC, for Christ's sake. But even after that, they get a lot of upgraded mages. Terra gets her 140. You have new units like Kefka, Roy Mustang, which are both powerful magic users. So Fire went from having no coherent teams to 2 coherent teams that are both strong in the meta. It's great for them. Solid third place. The other elements are all kind of, yeah, I haven't heard a lot of great things about Ice. I don't see many or really any high-ranked Ice units on this list. Alaya should be with Eliza in the A+ tier, but Alaya wasn't in the pool, so she couldn't put her there. Yeah, which is kind of unfortunate for us Ice folks. However, another factor that wasn't able to factor into this was Chaos Golem, which is going to be an Ice Earth Esper. Since Earth is really strong, this is going to be a great way to splash in maybe one of these Ice units and make them part of a stronger team. Why and how you would go about this, I'm not really sure, because I haven't quite seen Chaos Golem's numbers yet, and I'm not sure what kind of Esper it is either, so... I mean, probably a tank Esper, one would assume, but, you know, maybe, maybe not. But Wind, Dark, and Light are all kind of meh. I would say probably if there was one element that stood a really good contender for 5th place, just jumping above Light, Wind, and Ice, which are all, again, kind of meh right now, it would be Dark. It would be Dark because of Sephiroth. Sephiroth is the first perfect unit, as PST described it, which I think is fair. Hojo put a lot of work into making him perfect. Anyways, character design aside, he's going to be incredibly powerful when he comes out. He's going to be meta warping in a lot of ways that we're going to talk about. He is incredibly powerful. And again, it's just the fact that there haven't been any new Dark units, or there haven't been any incredibly meta relevant Dark upgrades. On launch, Sephiroth is going to wipe the floor with the meta for a very long time, right? But this is going on like 3.5 months after launch for him. And a lot of the units that he was good with previously, they've all kind of fallen off. I mean, there was a point when Sephiroth first comes out, when Whisper first gets her upgrade, Whisper and Sephiroth are a great team together. In fact, Whisper and Sephiroth are probably a great team even before that. The thing is, unfortunately, JP has at this point shifted back away from a resistance-based meta to a more defense-based meta. There's less defense penetration coming with new units. I'm a little bit skeptical about, while I believe that, I'm a little bit skeptical that it wasn't common enough in mid units, over the last year, that this is not as relevant. But apparently, with the newest units, less of them have defense penetration, more of them are going into damage type resistance penetration. So you're seeing a lot of slash attack resistance penetration, especially. So tanks that deal with resistances are becoming less and less viable, where you'll notice the big tanks on this list, or at least, well, we've got Alphonse up in the S+ tier. Then we got to drop down into, well, I guess Miranda's a tank. And, oh, yeah, King Mont. Oh, shit, Warrior of Light. Okay, so there's 3 in the in-between tier. Oh, damn, Celeste, 4. Oh, boy. Might be going blind. And then we've got Moraga, Joom, Engelbert. I don't know why he's not higher, all in the S tier. And one thing that most of these units have in common is that they're not resistance tanks, they are defense tanks. Because apparently against the newer units, maybe against Sephiroth specifically in some cases, or just in general is my understanding. In general, my understanding is that there are less new units with defense penetration. So defense has become a more popular way to tank, which has kind of flipped the tanking world. I'm not saying that Whisper isn't going to be great for us maybe over the next 3 months, but there is a point at which she drops off, and unfortunately by that point pretty much all of the other dark units that at some point were good have also kind of dropped off. The best partner for Sephiroth also would be Dark Fina. She gets an early 140 upgrade, and if you'll notice, she is the second Dark unit on this list. There is not a Dark unit in S+, in between, or S tier, only in SS, and then we have to drop down to A+. A+. Anyways, that's roughly where the elements are. I talked a little bit about some meta stuff. I want to talk about some new mechanics that are slowly being... Boop boop, while we're talking about quick additions to kind of a tanking meta, one thing that's going to become more and more common, especially through buffs, but also through maybe vision cards and other sources, is AoE resistance. AoE resistance is going to be able to stack even higher than it could before, and this is going to mean that there is kind of a whole new avenue of tanking with AoE resistance tanking that's going to become more and more common, and because of that, there are going to be kind of an increasing emphasis on units that have powerful single target moves. Just saying. AoE moves will still be probably powerful, especially outside of those contexts, because, you know, hit more units, do more damage, crowd control. It's hard to strategically make this strategy bad, but if you throw enough AoE resistance on somebody, you sure can. And there are... I mean, most units have strong single target moves and AoE moves, or usually they lean more towards single target and maybe have a couple AoEs. But there are definitely characters that are just meant for carpet bombing, and outside of that, they really only have a very basic attack, as you'll find. I'm thinking, like, not super meta relevant, but Black Witch Helena is a good example of this phenomenon. Rolled out. So one that we are definitely more in the middle of, one that I think players who are more familiar with newer units in global will recognize, especially people who, I don't know, have ever fought a snow, will know that threshold heals or healing, self-healing mechanics are becoming more common. There are more and more of these. It really started more so on tanks, but now we're starting to see it more on brawlers. I mean, Perrine is a great example of this, and then moving forward into the future, Reagan is also a good example of this. Neither of them are tanks by any means. However, they are just thick enough that they can definitely take a hit, and then they can heal up. So, if you haven't already figured this out, healing power down, or having access to it, potentially, if you need it, is going to be more and more relevant. I'm not saying it's the best mechanic. Honestly, Gumi balances the meta pretty well with these things. I mean, things have gotten out of hand before, but when you consider how many plates they're simultaneously spinning, I would say this game is fairly well balanced. And getting better in balance, I think, as we move into kind of what we're talking about here and what's coming next for JP. One of the next big meta changers in terms of new abilities is going to come with Yuffie. So that's going to be sure hit avoidance. And I want to say that there's like 4 or 5 different units at this point. Lamega. Chunak maybe being the most relevant. That have this now. So this is kind of how they roll these things out, right? They give it to one unit, they let them feel special about it, just long enough for their banner and their collaboration to expire. They give you a couple weeks of buyer's remorse for not pulling that unit with that cool unique ability that maybe nobody will ever get again. And then about 2 weeks later, they drop another unit that has that, or give it to an older unit that you might not have cared about, but now you want to build because it has that thing that you thought was so special. So, in explaining, I don't think I actually explained the history. I don't think I want to explain the history of any meta necessarily, just because it's been several years. There's at least several steps and stages to each different meta that I could talk about, whether we're talking about defense versus defense penetration, slash versus slash resistance versus slash resistance penetration, etc. But for Evasion, there have been 2 answers, and those answers have kind of layered themselves on top of each other to create a game state where Evasion just doesn't quite work very consistently anymore. And those two changes were to A, give newer units higher accuracy for a while, especially newer dark units, because the real evasion problem was within light. So that's a great way to balance that without necessarily handicapping new evasion units and other elements too much. But the other really big thing, especially with job upgrades, which is really an underappreciated power creep in a positive way for older units. Because when they upgrade the older jobs to bring them more in line with newer stuff, it can add a whole bunch of newer abilities to a whole bunch of older units that can suddenly mean that they have a way to compete in metas that didn't exist when they were first released or last updated, and kind of make them relevant again. Usually these are a little bit more limited in scope than what they're giving to the brand new gotcha unit they want you to pull, but this is a business. That's how business works. You have a problem, take it up with capitalism. So that is an example of that, and that kind of changes the game a bit because, at least for those units, it doesn't necessarily change things for units that aren't getting this ability, but at least for the units that do, now they have at least one part of that equation that isn't working against them. They can ignore those sure hit abilities, and this is especially important with Sephiroth having a big sure hit AoE courage and re-raise removal, almost guaranteed death if you step into this diamond attack. Very reminiscent of Ruinstern back in his heyday, but to the nth degree. It's really helpful for that, but it's also going to make a lot of teams that were previously pretty consistent against evasion at least inconsistent against that one individual character within an evasion team while that buff lasts, which should be enough time for them to do some real damage. Ultimately, this is going to bring certain specific evasion teams back into the meta, while not necessarily bringing all of evasion across the board into awesomeness. And I don't think that there have been at least any UR light units that have gotten this bonus yet. Maybe in a future Elena upgrade, it seems like it would be kind of a perfect benefit for her. But maybe they want to wait a while before giving the light strong evasion units again. Okay, I get it. We abused our power when you gave it to us before. We broke the game with Elena. We know. But do we have to be punished for it for like this long? Come on, y'all. Anyways, light and dark need a little bit of love. But also wind and ice seem to need a little bit of love. But it's great that a lot of these other elements are getting a spot in the spotlight, because I mean, other than lightning being kind of ever present throughout this game, because you know it's Cloud's element, it's always going to be good because it's Cloud's element. Yeah. Other than lightning kind of always being good, giving earth, water, and fire a chance to shine is really great, because I think these are historically the three most picked on elements in this game. So congratulations to all those players. Rip wind and ice. Although I will say ice is getting some pretty good upgraded units. So while it's not getting new units that would really catapult it into being great, it is actually a really good element to chill and save for, because you're going to be able to build a pretty good ice team just based on existing units once they get their upgrades, instead of having to rely on pulling something new to make your ice team work. Now, of course, you're not going to have maximum firepower because you're not pulling any new units again, but it works. I think there's kind of similar opportunities for wind as well, especially with Edward. And if you haven't picked up Tifa, although Tifa's pretty low on this list, but Edward and Tifa is not bad. Edward and Tifa is a good combination that really makes up for Tifa a lot. And again, this tier list, and this was said by PST, this tier list is based on units as an individual, not the teams that they would be on or anything like that. So there are a lot of units in lower tiers here that can really, really shine with proper S tier support. So, you know, Tifa with Joom and Edward is not a bad team. That's a good team. Tifa usable, I guess. But she's not, like, great all by herself. She really needs that punching partner, I think, to be great. Which is why she's only A tier. Anyways, the third meta changing trend that I want to talk about kind of goes in hand with job-based VCs, and a trend that I really hope we're seeing. It may be a little bit early to call it a trend. I think there's only 2 to maybe 3 units that actually have this ability, but we are starting to see elemental chaining resistance on tanks. It started with Alphonse. Alphonse was, at least when he was released, a very special boy for that, but a lot of people speculated that more units would be getting that in the future, and it makes sense because it allows you... Well, think about it this way. Since FFBE, these games have largely been built around building chains to do more damage. There's a lot less chaining options in WoTV than there were in FFBE. FFBE was quite ridiculous in this respect. However, it was a good ridiculous, but it's a bit more restrained in WoTV, but it is still the best way to deal a lot of damage. What this is going to do is discourage elemental chaining and encourage damage type chaining. Now, this doesn't mean that elemental teams are getting kicked out of the meta. Again, they have a lot of advantages because of master abilities and the way that master abilities work, and also because they have a more established line of VCs. These things are going to keep mono elemental teams powerful well into the future. And if you didn't get it from the way I introed this video, I don't know. The fact that I spent like the first 15 minutes talking about different elemental teams, it's still relevant. But along with job-based VCs being stronger, which they kind of have to be to make up for some of the disadvantages, elemental chain resistance on tanks at first, kind of like healing power up, or not healing power up, although that is also a thing that more tanks are seeing now, but threshold heals on tanks. This is going to be probably very similar to where give JP a month or two and we're going to start seeing this ability on brawlers. We're going to start seeing this ability on units that are otherwise glass cannons. We're going to start seeing this on evasion units or what the hell ever. We're going to start seeing it more of everywhere, to the point where if you're in the tippy top, if you're fighting the newest units, then actually rainbow teams are going to become important again. And if they become important at the top tier of the meta, they're going to trickle down into the rest of it. And anyways, they're going to be really specific teams though. And let me give you an example of something that just became really popular in JP. Well, fairly popular. I mean, I know someone's running it to good effect. But this is Kefka, Roy Mustang, and Summer Helena, which might sound like kind of an odd team, but you can really fill that team out with fire VCs and then supplement it with glove VCs, and you have a really powerful team because all 3 of these are glove users. I mean, I guess if we had a 140 Zoma, you might be able to fit Zoma in here, but like, this is just a really powerful team together. They hit like a truck, especially thanks to these new VCs. So that's not like a fully rainbow team, but we are starting to see more elemental diversity. We're also starting to see a lot more of, like, we'll see Alphonse as a tank on a fire team as well, just to absolutely ruin water units. So we are starting to see more balance, and I'm not saying that these are like defensive teams, because I know I've already explained bait teams. That's not what this is. These are actually people's these are the teams that people are running in like duel and stuff, not on defense. So that's really interesting, and I think elemental VCs are helping that. I'm sorry, job-based VCs are helping that, and I really think that if both of these things in conjunction can do something that's going to be really cool and actually diversify the meta to where it's not just about there being 8 elements. It's now about there's 8 elements, there's 5 damage type. Well, there's only 4 you can chain. Damn. Casting mages are really getting screwed on that. So much worse in this future meta, which actually, you know what? If that is the dominant form of chaining to deal damage, that might actually push casting mages out of the meta. And when I say casting mages, I mean mages that attack with magic attack, because that doesn't chain. If we're talking about units like Dialdo can chain because he does piercing damage. If we're talking about, let's say, Elena can chain incredibly well because she does slash. So units like that, mages like that, maybe particularly might become more important. Mages that use typically physical damage types instead of magic attack, if that makes sense. Because that form of chaining is going to become more important as elemental chaining becomes devalued. But also, it's going to become a lot more relevant because if you're really leaning into a job VC-based team, they're probably doing the same damage type most of the time. So I think that these two things are going to push us slowly into a more job-based meta. I do think that there will still be, or at least an element, at least a damage type meta. If not really allowing job-based VC rainbow teams to compete and maybe even become kind of dominant against multiple elements, which is kind of where Strike is right now. In fact, one of the only teams that was actually put all in the same tier, because a lot of teams got broken up, was Perrine, Edward, and Alphonse. It's a completely rainbow team, and it beats ass. Because, I mean, if you're looking at... if you're looking at in between up to double S tier, there's really only like 3 teams here out of all of these units that are particularly good. You've got Mont and maybe Roy Mustang and Kefka. Unfortunately, Terra doesn't really fit in with the other fire units that are this high. Neither does Yuffie. I mean, she fits in with Mont, but there's not a third unit for that team that really makes sense. I guess you have a strong water team because you have 5 good water options up here, which you could pretty much mix and match to make a pretty good water team. But other than that, it's the only team, and it's all S plus tier too. Like, I had to really make any other team make sense. I had to bring in the in-between tier because otherwise, I mean, if you want to look at just SS and S plus tiers on this list, that is the only team that you can make out of just those 2. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't potentially other things that you could do. I'm not saying that you couldn't potentially do Yuffie, Kefka, and Terra. I'm just saying that those 3 units don't really have any synergy with each other. So I think that kind of speaks to where Strike is and where maybe that particular team is and how powerful they might be. And if you look at it, they have a counter in terms of element to 3 out of 4 of the top elements in the game. If you have fire units, you're getting hosed by Perrine. If you have earth units, you're getting just shut down by Edward. If you have water units, Alphonse is just going to soak them up. It's lovely. So, you know, that's kind of one of the dynamics, one of the basic and kind of accepted dynamics of WoTV that has played out for the last couple of years that is slowly going to change. How quickly will this happen? I mean, judging from how quickly some things have shifted in JP, I could say for global, maybe this process might have us to a really interesting and diverse place maybe in 8 months, because JP isn't there yet, but they are really starting to open the door into a lot of really, really wild build combinations being viable. And it is largely, and again, I think that if elemental chain resistance becomes more common, especially if it gets upgraded, if it gets added to a job upgrade, to where all of a sudden, let's say, for whatever reason, red mages, one of their buffs gives them elemental chain resistance. Now, all of a sudden, everyone with red mage sub can give themselves elemental chain resistance. Or, I don't know, like Kodadama wielders maybe get... Nope, that's already been upgraded. Shit. But you know what I mean. If an older job gets this as an upgrade, then it's really hit the big time. And at that point, it's definitely going to be a meta that's going to lean more into job-based VCs. But more specifically than that, that's just going to work synergistically with the fact that it's going to be a damage type chaining meta as opposed to an elemental required meta. Anyways, I think I might be able to edit this to under 30 minutes, so I'm going to quit while I'm ahead and see you in the next one.